George Washington's image has long been frozen in the American imagination. The stoic general crossing the Delaware, the dignified first president standing under the weight of a newly born republic, the powdered wig and solemn stare immortalized on currency and monuments. Yet beneath that marble exterior lies a far more complicated and deeply human story, one that involves hidden family lines, the brutal legacy of slavery, and the unexpected shape of American ancestry in 2025. Because in a surprising twist of history, most of George Washington's living descendants today are black. Washington, like many of the founding fathers, had a profoundly tangled relationship with slavery. At the age of 11, he inherited 10 enslaved workers and 280 acres of land when his father died. From that young age, human lives were part of his wealth portfolio. His fortune grew dramatically in 1759 when he married Martha Dandridge Custis, the wealthy widow of a Virginia planter. Along with her came nearly 100 more enslaved people, expanding Washington's holdings and solidifying his status as one of Virginia's elite landowners. By the standards of the time, Washington was a strict master, but over the decades, particularly during and after the Revolutionary War, his attitudes began to shift. As the colonies fought for liberty from British tyranny, Washington confronted the hypocrisy of a struggle for freedom built on the backs of enslaved laborers. Late in his life, he even described slavery as the only unavoidable subject of regret in his personal affairs. In his will, Washington took an unprecedented step among major founding fathers. He ordered that the 123 enslaved people he owned outright be freed after Martha's death. It was radical for its time, though limited. Nearly 200 others remained enslaved at Mount Vernon under the Custis estate, which Washington had no legal power to change. George and Martha never had children together. Some historians speculate Washington may have been rendered sterile by smallpox in his youth, while others believe Martha's earlier childbirth injuries prevented further pregnancies. But the absence of direct heirs did not mean the absence of a bloodline. Washington adopted Martha's grandchildren, including George Washington Parke Custis, known as Wash. It was Parke Custis's life, not Washington's, that would set into motion a hidden legacy that history rarely acknowledged until recently. In 1821, on the grounds of Arlington House, a grand mansion Parke Custis built overlooking the Potomac River, an extraordinary wedding took place. Two enslaved household servants, Maria Carter and Charles Syphax, were married inside the mansion itself. Such a ceremony was almost unheard of. Enslaved people were rarely, if ever, allowed to marry formally, and certainly not within the home of their enslaver. Maria Carter was rumored to be the biological daughter of Parke Custis himself, the result of his relationship with an enslaved woman named Ariana Carter. Circumstantial evidence was strong. Maria's unusual privileges, her wedding in the mansion, and the fact that Custis freed her and her children just 5 years later, granting her 17 acres of land to live on. When the Union seized Arlington House during the Civil War, Congress passed a special act returning that very land to Maria, a remarkable legal recognition of her unique status. These were not isolated acts of kindness, but quiet acknowledgments of blood ties. Parke Custis was also said to have fathered children with another enslaved woman, Caroline Branham. Oral history within Branham's family, passed down for generations, held that Parke Custis fathered a daughter named Lucy with her. A descendant, Zisunni Miller Matema, discovered her family's link to Washington's household in the 1990s while researching at the Alexandria Black History Museum. In Washington's own handwriting, she found references to her ancestor. "My aunt told me," she said, "that if the truth of our family was known, it would topple the first families of Virginia." For most of American history, this lineage was whispered about but rarely acknowledged. It was not politically convenient to admit that the symbolic father of the nation had a legacy intertwined with black families, or that his adopted lineage, the Custis family, produced generations of free black descendants through relationships with enslaved women. But in recent years, that silence has been breaking. In June 2025, the National Park Service held a reenactment of Maria Carter and Charles Syphax's 1821 wedding on the same grounds at Arlington House. There they unveiled a new family tree publicly listing George Washington Parke Custis and Ariana Carter as Maria's parents. It was a formal acknowledgement that the first family of America was far more complex than its portrait suggested. Matthew Penrod, a National Park Service ranger and program manager, spoke at the event. "We fully recognize that the first family of this country was much more than what it appeared on the surface. Alongside the reenactment, the Park Service opened a new exhibit, Lives Bound Together, exploring these intertwined family histories and giving voice to the descendants of those once enslaved there. It marked a turning point, not only in scholarship but in public memory. Over time, the Carter Syphax and Branham lines flourished. Maria and Charles had 10 children, many of whom lived freely on the land she inherited. Their eldest son, John Syphax, was educated in Washington, D.C., became a property owner, and later served in political office during Reconstruction. Another son, William Syphax, became chief messenger for the Department of the Interior and helped establish public high schools for African Americans in the capital. These families were not hidden. They were prominent members of 19th century black society, their achievements woven into the same fabric of a country that had once enslaved their ancestors. By the 21st century, DNA testing, oral traditions, and genealogical research converged to reveal something remarkable. Since George Washington Parke Custis had no legitimate sons, his white line continued only through his daughter, Mary Anna Custis Lee, the wife of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. But the black branches, descendants of Maria Carter Syphax, Lucy Branham, and others, spread widely through African American communities across Virginia, Washington, D.C., and beyond. By 2025, genealogists estimate that the majority of living biological descendants tied to Washington's adopted family are black. This does not mean George Washington himself fathered children with enslaved women, as Thomas Jefferson did with Sally Hemings. No definitive evidence supports that, but through his adopted grandson, the Custis bloodline carried Washington's family legacy into Black America. For centuries, these families kept their stories alive through oral history. Even when official records erased them, their recent public acknowledgement represents not just historical correction, but healing, a long-delayed recognition that America's founding story was never purely white nor purely free. Zun Ni Miller Matema, the Branham descendant, reflected on what it means to carry this shared heritage. "We're all so much a part of each other," she said. "It just makes no sense anymore to be a house divided." Her words capture the deeper truth of this history. The story of George Washington's descendants is not only about power and oppression, but resilience and connection. The bloodlines of America's founders flow today through both white and black families, descendants of masters and the enslaved, bound together in one national story. The idea that most of George Washington's living descendants are black might seem startling to those raised on idealized versions of history, but it's also profoundly American. It's a story of contradiction and continuity, of tragedy and triumph, of people who endured the darkest parts of the past to create new futures for their children. When we look at the descendants of George Washington's adopted family in 2025, we don't just see history rewritten, we see history reclaimed, alive in the faces of those who carry it forward. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden sides of history.